why don't we ask you guys a little bit about yourselves so we can get to know our audience. So a quick little poll will pop up. So if you don't mind just answering that real quick, that will just help us gauge sort of where you guys are at. So we'll just give you a couple more seconds to answer that. Perfect. Well, so just so we can kind of introduce sort of, you a little bit more to our young listeners, do you mind sort of telling us a bit about your career journey and sort of how you went from being interested in economics, when you were 16 to 18 to sort of where you are now and what that was like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And that's a great question. So I probably first started being interested in economics when I was about, I don't know, 14 or 15. I grew up in Italy, so that's where I was in secondary school, and we had to do a school project with something to do with economics, which wasn't part of the curriculum at the time. And I just thought it was quite interesting. And one thing I quite liked is that I think when you're growing up, you always hear about the economy and things like that in the news, and you always felt like, oh, it's not quite for me, it's too complicated. The for grown-ups and people with big jobs. But then when you start looking into it and you start understanding it, it becomes really interesting. And I guess that's what eventually, when I was choosing what to do for university studies, is when I gravitated towards economics, because I felt it had a good mixture of interesting topics in terms of allowing you to understand how the world works and big topics, and like, inflation, GDP, and all those types of things that you hear about in the news. But then also it's quite interesting in the way that those things are analyzed. So sort of the quantitative analytical side of the modeling that you do in economics, and the framework that you apply to problems, which I found quite interesting and I wanted to explore a bit more. So that's what led me into economics as a field generally when I went to university. And then once I got to studying it more deeply in economics, I probably shifted my interest a little bit. As I said, I started off being interested in how economics allowed me to engage with the news and big ticket items. And at the time when I was choosing what to do for university, a financial crash was happening, which you probably now know from history books. And so that was how it was interesting to me to understand what was going on there. And then while I was at university, I gravitated towards sort of more the statistical quantitative side of things, which was then explored with some further graduate studies. And then I really just liked doing analysis and playing around with data, and I wanted to do that as a career. So I was lucky to find job, the career path that I'm on, and now I'm at KPMG, which essentially that's what I do in my day job. I just we help clients that have got some issue where they think an economist could help with a piece of analysis, and that could be about inflation or GDP or other things, and we can come in, do some analysis, and help them understand whatever issue around the market or the economy that they are interested in. And that's what I find interesting in the first place, and I still find interesting now, and I think I'm quite lucky to be able to do that in my current role.
So when you sort of took that first kind of class of economics, sort of,
Yeah.
at your A levels, as it were, I'm curious because I had this very similar, sort of experience where you come in it with the news and then you sort of discover, oh, there's all this math behind it.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And so how is that learning process? I think some people can be put off by the math, but I think those of us that have kind of gone through it, I'm just curious what your experiences were like with learning about the math behind econ.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think it's a surprise at first when you come into it and you find maths, and like, oh, maths, I wasn't expecting this. And it's also because initially it's also quite a lot of Greek letters and algebra, etc., that more than the actual number cruncher that you might do later on. I think the thing I liked about it is that it's all very it's all very rational. So you can, there's always some assumptions, and from the assumptions you build up your model of the economy and how different agents operate. And that's quite structured and logical. It is something that the way I think I've always enjoyed. I would say that if you enjoy thinking through issues and how different um, elements of a problem fit together, I think that's probably what economics is really all about. I think maths come into it, but if you've never found yourself to be a super mathsy person, I wouldn't necessarily think that that should put you off. You can probably, you will need some maths, but I think there's a lot of the economics and being a good economist, especially later on, like in my career now, that you don't really need to be doing derivatives on the daily, but you need the intuition, you need the structure, and to enjoy thinking through issues in a specific way. That is what economics is all about.
Yeah, because I think what we're teaching students is always that sort of, think of the intuition. The math is there to help you with the
Yeah.
intuition. You can literally start with the graphs that you see of supply and demand kind of in your very first econ class, and that will take you, all the way through, because it's that logical step-by-step process of, if this moves, then that also must move. And yeah, no, hearing you say I don't use that much of the math, it hurts me as a professor, but I know that's the
No, I
reality.
do.
There's
You do
never as much as you
eventually,
think
but
there's
I
going to
think
be.
it always it's as you say, right? You always start from the intuition and the curves, and then everything needs to be substantiated by the math eventually. But I think you can always the intuition is always the best thing, and I think it's the thing that um, even for those who take a career to study economics and then decide to take their career in a slightly different way, I think the problem solving, the idea of looking at a complex system and being able to break it into its component, think about how they're interacting and how you might then approach whatever issue it is that you're trying to fix. I think that's something that you can apply to strategy or marketing or finance or even some non-business related things if that's what you want to do. But I think it's the way of thinking that it's giving you as well that I think it's quite nice, and hopefully for people in the audience who are studying economics now, they're already finding that useful as a framework.
So sort of thinking about that back to those, 16 to 18-year-old years, was it, which was your favorite kind of economics that you were, were you a micro guy or a macro guy?
I was a macro guy back then, so I'm a micro guy now. So I've flipped, I've transitioned. But at the time I was a macro guy, and I think and I imagine people in the audience know, but macro, we're talking about the wider economy, GDP, inflation, and those types of things. And microeconomics instead looks at the behavior of single economic agents, so like how a firm or a consumer might behave in a given market. And I think, as I was saying, because the original impetus behind my interest in economics was the financial crash, I think that was what I was really interested in. So that was at the time where monetary policy was all the rage and everyone was paying attention to all the different kinds of things that the ECB and the Fed were coming up with to try and stimulate the economy at 0% interest. So that's probably, again, we're talking about, there's all this stuff in the news. It feels complicated, but I want to understand it. So being able to delve into that understanding, with the right curves, who's moving what in order to do what. That's actually the first model you do, is the model allows you to understand what's going on there. That is, yeah, I would say that's probably the thing that I find most interesting, and that kept me interested, I think, because I will go to class, I will learn about the ISLM model, and then you go home and you'll be like, I can explain what's going on with the economy right now. And it's obviously very simplistic, but at the time you feel like you've cracked the code to something that is omnipresent but not so well understood.
Yeah, I think a lot of people typically have that sort of initial view of economics as being this macro thing, which is quite funny because I came into economics through Freakonomics, a very
Okay.
micro level. How do we use economics to explain the weird stuff going around the world? Like there was this great chapter on like sumo wrestlers,
Yeah.
You know, like how do we use economics to understand sumo wrestling and some of the weird tournament results that pop up in sumo wrestling? And linking that to like, you know, sort of standardized tests or something. And it was just showing how these underlying principles, you know, sort of explain human behavior. You know, so if you're sitting there going, you know, oh, I'm not really interested in finance, you know, economics, I think is, you know, that's what I loved about university was it opens it up beyond just this micro macro dichotomy. I think my parents would have been much more happy if I stayed in the macro side because I can't help them with investments or anything like that. So what was your favorite class that you ever took in economics?
I would have to say, and this is a nice segue from your free economics example, I would have to say it was probably um, something like microeconometrics or something like that. So that is essentially where you learn how to use statistics to explore some of the economic relationships that you study. So at university, you will come in and you start studying sort of more of the theory, you know, you do like your macro 101 and your micro 101, and it's all equations and curves, etc. But later on, once you've got those foundations well set, then what you move on to is to try and understand, okay, so we've got this intuition from the model that as price increase, demand should decrease, or whatever it is that we're interested in. If we look at some actual data from the past 5 years from this market, what do we see? And how would we go about trying to test if that relationship holds out in the wild? And you do, and it's a very nice class. We would have the intuition of a specific model or techniques is to use the data to solve an economic problem, and then you get a problem set with the data set. You have to go play around in this data, which is the software that you use to do economic analysis and come up with the results, etc. And I think that was very interesting because it was just a very challenging class that was stretching, and I really felt like I was learning a lot, that I came out of that class learning to do something that I didn't know what it was before I came into that class. And it's something that just personally then set me off on my career trajectory, essentially, because I learned that I really enjoyed data analysis and I really enjoyed thinking through issues of how would we try to think about quantifying these effects, specifically what data do we need, how do we need to use it, etc., which is essentially what I still do now in my job. And again, it's an example of how studying economics, you just pick up some raw skills that can be applied in various different segments, because you could take those skills and apply it into any kind of quantitative problem that you're facing. It doesn't need to be demand and supply.
So since it's June, I think it's, you know, it's the time to ask you sort of what does pride mean to you? And how do you celebrate pride, you know, either within KPMG or within your own sort of professional life?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a gay man, so that's the reason why I feel particularly strongly about the topic. And I think it is very important for organizations of various nature to acknowledge and celebrate pride. I think I've been quite lucky in my career so far. I've always been in places where there was a visible sort of network of LGBT people and allies that would champion these things. So at KPMG, for example, we've always had a significant presence in terms of, you know, we do events for Pride and LGBT History Month, etc. And I think and we do all sorts of diversity and inclusion trainings, which means that people are, you know, I think that, first of all, that sets a clear signal that this is a place where diversity is welcome. And I think that's important to do in itself. To me personally, I think pride is generally on top of the, you know, awareness talks that you can do and those types of things. I think it is normally something that I quite associate with a joyful time of the year. It's, you know, it's a time for celebration of diversity and queerness and the LGBTQ plus community. So to me, it's quite important that it's a time to, you know, to mark the fact that the LGBT community exists and is accepted and is included, but also it's a time for the LGBT community to celebrate and come together and enjoy. So KPMG, what we do normally is we'll march in various prides throughout the UK. Mainly, I'm London based, so I'll attend the London one, and it's just a very joyous, nice occasion for us to come together as LGBT staff and allies and celebrate Pride. And as I said, it's important for visibility, so people see, oh, being LGBT is great, and everyone is accepted, but also for us to feel that there's that moment of celebrating a very big part of who you are, and that determines which has probably for a lot of people been a source of struggle throughout their lives, but hopefully, and you'd like to think for a lot of people now is a cause for celebration and happiness, and an area where they've been able to find a lot of joy in their life, which is also important to celebrate. And I am very happy to be able to join an event like this, and we do other events like this throughout the month of July as June as KPMG, is because I am quite as I said, I think there's some spaces like professional spaces, etc. But maybe we've been able to create some inclusive spaces, but I know that that's not the situations everywhere, so that we can be ambassadors out there of communicating the positive message about pride and inclusivity. I'm very happy to do that. And yeah, what does pride mean to you? What do you
So I guess for me, it's bringing sort of my whole self to the office. I've researched the LGBT community. That's kind of what I got into. So I mean, the joke is sort of, 11 months out of the year, no one cares about my research, and then June rolls around, and this is my time to shine, because it is putting us out there. It's kind of saying, in economics, we have all this data, and sometimes we study the whole country. We'll study all workers in the UK, and we don't really, there are a bunch of people studying gender, studying race, studying immigration, and so I kind of bring a lot of that and my own experiences as a gay man into my research on the LGBT community. So I've done a lot of stuff thinking about like what is like sort of what's queerness in the workplace, and like that gender nonconformity, and what does that do to labor market outcomes? Like how much discrimination is there? Why is there discrimination? And what's the link sort of with, prejudice and, these types of issues? And so it's really kind of, pride is just me being able to celebrate using my own knowledge about myself and my community to, bring this new knowledge to the world that, 20, 30 years ago, people weren't even thinking about, or weren't willing to engage with. And now you kind of get this month where people really engage with your work, they celebrate it, and it's just so nice to sort of not get the validation, but to share with the world what I love and what I love about this community, from what I do day in and day out research wise with people that are interested. So what does the Breathe Network do at KPMG, and what are you guys doing for Pride?
So more generally, we are quite a large network, award-winning, I should say as well. That there's several different roles that an employee network fulfills in a big organization like KPMG. So it's on a basic level, we're just a group of people that come together and share their interest for LGBT issues. So there's some degree to which the community exists as just as a community. When someone joins the company, they want to find like-minded people. They can join the newsletter, they can come to the meetings, and they can meet other LGBT people, and they can share experiences of working, get advice about how to succeed as an LGBT person in the workplace, etc. And also we can signpost policies and useful resources and things like that. We then try to also be an agent of change within and outside the organization. So we will we have different people that have different roles, but try to feed into various inclusivity policies that our colleagues in sort of in HR, in the people office are putting forward. So, for example, members of the Breathe network were important in helping the people team at KPMG come up with a trans inclusion policy a few years ago. We campaigned for the creation of gender neutral bathrooms in the office, but then we also organize sort of lunch and learns trainings events to support the sort of D&I LGBT inclusiveness of awareness of the wider firm. And we organize events around LGBT History Month and Pride, including our various Pride parades, fundraising events. I personally do most of our work with external organizations, so organizing our work with charities. So we've historically done a lot of work with the Terence Higgins Trust around sexual health and HIV. But we work with a number of other charity organizations as well. Yeah, so that's broadly speaking what the network does and tries to do. And I'm sure I've missed something, but there's just quite a lot of things that they do, that we do.
So what advice do you think you would give an LGBTQ teen who's being bullied or made fun of about their sexuality or their gender identity?
Oh, it's quite a tough question. Well, I'm gonna get the cliche out of the way and say that it does get better, because in my experience it does tend to. I also know from experience that in the moment that can give you only so much comfort. I would say that a little bit, as we were just covering, a lot of being able to thrive, be yourself, and feel supported is to find like-minded individuals that can share how you feel and the challenges that you're going through. I realize when you're a teenager, and maybe some people are growing up in a small town. So, my partner is from rural Wales. He was literally the only gay in the village, so he found it really tough growing up there. But I know that he was able to find a community of people to rely on online, and I think that's increasingly probably what people do as well. They try to find on social media or some connection to make you feel that engage with people, or also just with stories and content that makes you understand that there's nothing wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with the way you feel and the way that you are, and that you and that you should be proud, and you should be so it should be confident that doesn't affect, and try to draw strength from the fact that there's other people who've gone through your issues and can give you positive stories about the outcomes of growing up as LGBT. Hopefully, I would hope so as well, that there's support that people can find in their family and their school and the people that they engage with in the real world as well. And there's yeah, I think that's probably I think when you're going through those tough times, it's really difficult to see hope. But and some of these things may feel a bit hollow when we're coming it from the other side. What would you say? Do you have any experience with someone who works in education about what you see working out? Obviously, it's a bit older when they get to you, but
Yeah, I think economics as a discipline is actually quite accepting, even when I was coming up, God, I'm going to say 20 years ago, when I was in the student shoes, it was, even back then, 2004, 2005, it was quite accepting. So I think we're quite privileged as a discipline, to be in this field that has, very famous LGBT economists. I mean, think of Maynard Keynes, who we study, who was bisexual. So it's always been a field that has been quite open. And so I've been really privileged to sort of not experience a lot of the prejudice that, people in other disciplines have. I think though it always does come back to it, it is cliche that it gets better, but I think, whatever you go through, it just makes you a stronger person. Like, I think as much as I say it's an accepting discipline, I think there was a lot of pushback with my research about, is it important enough? Is it high prestige enough? You know, can you really make a career doing this? And so people were always saying, you know, you should do that. It's good for you. You know, that's great for you, but they'd never recommend someone else do it. It was, I was a weirdo for going off into this. And I think sort of that, I wouldn't say, you know, lack of trust that this could be a very important topic from people. I think learning how to deal with that judgment, you know, when I made that choice, it sort of made me more confident later on when I kind of face people that don't trust me or kind of judge me for what I'm doing or what I'm researching. So it does get better because I think, you know, it's crap at the time. I don't want to sugarcoat it. You know, it made the doubt I had when I was doing my dissertation, you know, 12 hours a day on this topic, you know, people saying, you know, you should probably be doing something more important with your life. It's hard, but you know, you come out the other side knowing yourself and knowing that you are valued. And I think, you know, hearing people tell me it gets better was actually quite helpful at the time, you know, because they were on the other side and they kind of, you know, had these successful careers in economics and could show me how to handle that and where to go with that. So one final question before we get to the Q&A.
Okay.
If you didn't have a career in economics, what would you have done?
I don't know. I mean, realistically, given my skill set, probably I'm not sure. I would have liked to be a successful writer. That would have been my dream job. I'm not sure if I actually have the skills for that, to be honest with you. I think in terms of things that I had considered at the time before I went into economics, I think something else in the sciences. I'm gonna lump in economics as a science as well. You know, like I was very interested in physics. And to be honest with you, the reason why I went into economics is probably because it felt like similar to physics, but a bit easier. But yeah, probably I think it's probably still something a bit geeky, quantitative type work. But hopefully, maybe not. Maybe I would have written the next great British novel
Yeah, I guess
by
for
now.
me, it's always, I mean, the realistic answer, I would have run a bookshop. Like that was, you know, you look at
Yes, yeah.
books everywhere. Like reading and learning was always what I liked to do. But I probably would have ended up being a teacher of some kind, you know, like I love the classroom. Probably would not have taught economics at, you know, A levels. You know, I'm much more of a, like, I love teaching history. I love researching history. And so that's what would get me excited. You know, because if I'd left economics, I probably wouldn't still have that passion for it. But yeah, something where I get to talk all the time. Not that different from the day job.
Or you can have a podcast. That's another way of doing that.
Okay, so and the remaining time we have, we're going to open it up to the floor for some questions and answers. So if you have any questions, we'll go through the chat. So first one that we have is, what can economic institutions or firms in particular do to improve inclusion? You know, so either from your experience working at KPMG or kind of looking at the landscape more broadly.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so it's important that firms try to promote diversity. I think there's a moral case for it for sure, and there's also research that shows that there's an economic case for it if people need that persuasion as well.
For economists, we like the economic case for
it. In I think when it comes to my industry, to my industry, sort of hiring economists, for example, I think there's things that you can do in terms of, well, these types of initiatives. You can reach out to specific networks or type of institutions, you know, universities or schools, to try and promote diversity of various kinds. So it can be, you know, in terms of ethnic background, socioeconomic background, and also sort of LGBT inclusiveness as well. So there's all various different sides of diversity that we should try and promote, and also just gender balance as well. And I think for sure it it adds to the quality and the atmosphere of a team to have more diversity. I think diversity of thought and approach when you're dealing with issues and problems, but also for the environment that you create, which is more inclusive, different ways of people to approach issues, differences in culture that I think add a lot to the to the quality of a workplace. And in terms of solutions, there's some in economics, for example, we're finding some challenges at quite at the source, I would say. So there's not a lot of diversity into people choosing economics at A levels and then choosing economics at universities, and then therefore being available to be hired into an economist role in a professional firm. And this is what Discover Economics is all about, and we're happy to work with them on these issues. I've been hiring people into various positions for years now, and there is not a lot of diversity in the market out there. Even when you try to put in the right type of solutions, if you want to do like blind scoring of CVs or do other types of solutions, that some of the types of demographics that you want to tap into are just not there in some of the for some of the jobs. And so there's some work that needs to be done at source in economics to make sure that we're attracting a diverse group of people into studying economics at all various stages, so that we can then so that there's also a wider pool of people that can come into economist jobs, not just in professional services firm, but also in government, central banking, etc., to bring that diversity throughout the process. So there's something about hiring practices, but there's also something about inclusiveness more generally. I know that people, when I know I have LGBT friends, when they go for jobs and they interview at places, when they don't see anything on the website mentioned about inclusivity, but also I have friends from ethnic minority backgrounds that they say, when I've gone through 4 steps of interview in this company and they were all white men, that that might put them off compared to a different company where the vibes were different. So I think there's something about the projection that you give as a company and the policies that you have internally, and how inclusive a, a company you are, that also affects how attractive you are to prospective diverse hires. So I think that's also something that companies need to look into. And this is not just about putting a flag up during Pride Month, but it's also about making sure that the way your work practices and culture work are consistent with accommodating various types of diversity, going from LGBT and other types of diversity, but also even if we think about gender diversity, the inclusiveness of the policies that you have to make sure that women are included in the workforce appropriately and in a welcoming, safe environment, etc. So I think all of those things are important in making sure that you find the right people, and the right people want to come work with you because they think that's a place where they could thrive.
So one of the questions is asking us, why is it important to have diversity in economics? So I want you to show off that economic toolkit that you have of looking at this problem systemically. So why is it important within economics that we have diversity? Make that economic case for it.
Well, so we want to have good economists, because good economists are what we need in order to understand how the market works and to solve any issues that we have. So, housing is a big issue in this country, so we need to understand what's broken there and how do we fix it. We need good economists to be able to do that. And economists are good because they're smart, but they're also good because they understand the world around them and the issues that are present in that world. And you cannot really comprehend the full range of issues that affect the market and the wider economy if you don't have a variety of different points of view and experiences that people come from. It's difficult to imagine that we might be able to find solutions to big issues that we face as a country, as an economy, in relation to, for example, poverty and inclusion and welfare if all the people who are looking at that problem in government and in biggest institutions are, you know, privately educated and come from a privileged background. They probably don't really understand the you know, the everyday reality of some things. And the same thing applies to, you know, gender. You know, like we've had literature on labor economics and women's participation rate that was written before any woman was allowed into the department. And I'm sure that the inclusion of more women into economics departments has led to a much improved understanding of how women's participation rate is affected by all sorts of things. And that's not to say that only women can write about that, but I think that definitely helps with women somewhere in the department when you're thinking about that issue. And I'm not sure, maybe you can talk about a bit about the research that you've done, but when you're thinking about how issues of, you know, gender identity or sexual orientation might affect outcomes in terms of employment or housing safety, etc. Someone who's experienced these issues, have a first-hand understanding of those issues, might be able to explore them better, or as you were saying earlier, might even think about exploring those issues that no one's thought about exploring before. So I think diversity is in a field like economics that is all about applying yourself to issues and understanding what's going on with all these market outcomes and metrics that are all a bit messy. Having someone who has a fresh perspective and different experiences is extremely valuable when approaching these issues.
There's tons of research, I mean, that shows that if you give a team a problem, the team that, you know, all went to the same school, all had the same teachers, is going to come up with an answer that probably isn't that good, because we're facing a brand new problem going back to, the people studying the problem probably went to the same school that you did. So if they didn't come up with the solution, how are you going to come up with the solution? So if you bring in people, as you were saying, with these fresh eyes, teams that are more diverse are more productive. They make fewer mistakes. They come up with increasingly interesting questions. So if you're building a new product, if you have a diverse team, you get better innovation. So because you bring that knowledge of something, your own experiences bring something really valuable to the table, because you look at the world differently. So diversity in economics is really more beyond gender, race, class, sexual orientation. It's how do you approach a problem, and that's the brilliance of diversity, is that you have all these life experiences that shape how you approach these problems, how you consider the angle that you approach it at. We call these emitted variables that cause all these issues. If you can't see it, how do you model it? And if everyone kind of in the room is thinking the same way, they won't catch those. They're just floating around and they're not thinking about it, because they don't have that perspective that you need to look at the problem ever so slightly differently. So diversity is so important, because it makes the team better, which makes the product better, which makes customers more happy, which makes the economy more productive. So we just see, when we improve diversity within firms do better. And so, it's almost silly to be not diverse. Whatever gains you get from prestige of hiring from the same schools. And this is the problem with economics, is people think, oh, they're only going to talk to these types of people. But actually, I think there's a lot of movement in the field to recognize that the unique perspective people bring to economics, and it is so important. As we're saying, researching gender wage gap or women's labor supply, if you only have men doing it, the time between we realized, oh, the gender wage gap is caused by women having children and having to stay at home and do chores, is embarrassingly long from the first time we started looking at this question, probably 40 years. So if it takes us 40 years to ask an obvious question of what do children have to do with it, it probably suggests that we should have had a woman in the room a little bit sooner. So you just get better questions, better answers, more productive conversations, and it's a more fun environment to be in, beyond anything else. So did you have any role models that when you were at school or university, that really helped shape you as an economist, or you as a person more broadly?
That's a good question. I I can definitely think about some role models in terms of teachers and professors that were role models in terms of showing what a good economist was in terms of attitude and the approach they had to research and the things they were researching that really made me interested in the field. In terms of what a role model in terms, did I have a poster of Adam Smith in my room growing up? Not quite. I I wouldn't say so. No. What about you? Do you have a little bust of Adam somewhere in that office?
I don't think I had any. Like I had people I looked up to.
Yes. Yeah.
There's this fantastic researcher, Lee Badgett, who wrote the first ever paper on, are gay men and lesbians discriminated against in the labor market, back 1996. So when I was 6 years old, things I love to tell her, and she gets very angry when I mention that. But when I discovered that, and then that really sent me down this pathway research-wise. And when I got to meet her in person, and hearing about the barriers that she faced and sort of how she dealt with that, really she was able to give me just super, helpful stuff. So, it was really interesting. It was super cool to see, and she really helped me sort of think about how do I understand myself as an economist that wants to make a difference. And I think that was, so important for me as a young economist to see this queer woman really changing the field, thinking about these issues from a very, from a very economic standpoint, and sort of using her own experiences to inform her own research. And so that was so powerful and really shaped a lot of the work I do to this day, is heavily inspired by the things that she was thinking about, 20 years ago, and how she approached the world. Okay, so we'll leave it there if there's no other questions. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely wonderful. So we're gonna give you a poll just to sort of ask, how this went, what you guys got out of it. So if you could answer that real quick before you leave, we'd greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much.